The Headhunter. Sounds a whole lot like a anti-Susie Lou fan club to me.
Maledizione.
The Headhunter is a fantasy horror movie streaming right now on SHUDDER. And it's not the porno you think it is. It's more fun than a Wuhan wet market filled with bat bukkake. The Headhunter is a 2018 fantasy horror movie directed by Jordan Downey and starring Christopher Reig as the titular character. They made this movie on a budget of only 30 grand, and that's less money than Ellen DeGeneres uses to wipe her dirty coot. He's got a lot of heads on his wall. The Headhunter, he works as a bounty hunter for the nearby kingdom, going around slaying monsters, chopping off their heads, and then mounting them on his hovel's wall. It smells up the place worse than my collection of spooge socks. All the while, he's awaiting the eventual return of the evil creature that killed his daughter, all the while giving zero fucks to the fact that her mother has been gone for a very long time. With 13 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, this movie currently stands at 100% fresh reviewed. And that's clearly because all of those critics thought they were watching the porno version of this movie. At only 72 minutes, this movie could easily have been 30 minutes shorter. It's pretty redundant after a while, and the second act feels like it was filmed by 10-year-olds. It's like if Skyrim met Evil Dead and then was shot out of a cannon into a pile of shit. You can tell that the budget of this movie went entirely to the awesome armor that the hero wears. That's kind of cool because you believe this dude's a badass. But the fact that almost every monster hunt and headhunt takes place off screen becomes kind of laughable after a while and really telegraphed. The cinematography is great, and the filmmaker uses the beautiful landscape to his advantage. But of course, that lack of money starts to show its ugly head way too soon in this movie. I mean, by the time he's killed the third or fourth creature off screen, you know that nothing's gonna happen on screen. It's mostly just this dude sitting around inside of his hovel looking at those heads. Sort of like how I spend most of my days. The dialogue and the plot of this film definitely didn't get in the way of the movie. And that's kind of a disservice. It's a straightforward revenge movie, but it often just seems like it's a side quest in a bad Skyrim DLC. Norwegian actor Christopher Reig makes his feature film debut here, and thanks to his great on-screen presence, and like I said earlier, badass armor, you believe this motherfucker spends his days cutting off monster heads and mounting them to his wall. The only problem is, after not seeing him do it for a while, when we finally get to the climax and he sorta has a fight, it's like something out of an Ed Wood movie. Like you almost expect for the head to take this headhunter out the game really fast. It becomes laughable at some points. It basically destroys all of the goodwill it was painfully trying to create and earn during the first half. But that second half is pretty useless. It doesn't help build onto the thread of the movie. It doesn't help you understand what, I mean, you get while he's going after the monster that killed his daughter, but it looks way less threatening than the werewolf he basically kills early on. And they don't show that on screen either. It's very simple, straightforward. After a while, that simplicity just gets in its own way. While it's well shot and very well lit in a lot of places, it's ultimately, like I think, a failure basically because of its lack of budget. It becomes laughable, and that's the last thing you want in an atmospheric horror movie. Horror might even be too much of a strong word for this one. It's more of just a wordless revenge story. And it's kind of nice that it's simple and efficient, but even at 72 minutes, 30 old minutes of this movie are wasted with him just killing another monster off screen, mounting their heads to the wall, and then throwing his healing potions on, which essentially look like black shit that I pull out of my socks after they've been in that spooge pile too long. It doesn't really need more plot. It might have used a few more lines of dialogue, but what this movie desperately needed was a couple of on-screen battles. The last one is just him wrestling a tore off head, spoiler alert, and it looks hilarious as hell. You don't believe that this thing has any weight to it, any strength, and you can essentially just whoop it around like a telephone on the end of a cord, bash its head against the cave walls, which is essentially what our hero does here. But that's not the end of the head, even though this movie ended 30 minutes before this fight ever occurs. By the time you get to the end of this movie, you don't care anymore about the headhunter, or even the dude's daughter. I mean, she's resting peacefully in the grave, someplace this movie should have ended up way after the first act. It's a fantastically crafted piece of cinema in a way, because it shows you what you could do with just 30 grand. I mean, this movie makes every film nerd out there think that this thing is possible. Making a movie is within your reach. But really, unless you've got a little bit more going on, having a badass revenge tale that doesn't show a lot of revenge is kind of weak. Ultimately, this is a movie that only film nerds are going to care about, because while it's pretty metal, it's not really that watchable. After a while, it starts to get boring, and that's the worst thing you could ever have in an atmospheric horror movie. Just forgetting about the movie, stop caring about it, and ultimately kind of wishing that you were playing Skyrim. At least that has more twists and turns and some on-screen battles. I give this movie a C-. It's barely passable as a film, more like a really short Creepshow episode, also available streaming on Shudder. But as a feature, it barely even makes that mark at 72 minutes, especially when you could jettison at least 30 minutes of this drivel. It does manage to do what it can with what it's got, but ultimately that's just not enough to save the headhunter, as that one fat dude on TV who doesn't like pussy always says, this movie ended up playing itself. You can stream it right now on Shudder if you want to, or you could spend 30 better minutes watching Creepshow. And speaking of Shudder, to help with surviving the corona apocalypse, head right on over to Shudder and use the password SHUDDER. I mean, because what's better than waiting out the Holocaust than by watching bad, sometimes low-budget horror movies? Remember, while you're out there washing your balls, don't let spoilers ruin your life.